Friendsify, you want to watch super hit movie American Gangster in English. Then you must like this video if you're visiting our channel for the first time. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, West Film Friends. In today's video, the movie we're going to talk about is called American Gangster. I am also going to give you all the information on which OP platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie. This video is produced by West Film. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it, all the interesting facts about this movie in today's video. I'm going to tell you apart from this, we will discuss about the facts of this film's storyline, star cast actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. We will also talk about the story of this film, and I will give you a small review of the story of this film. Also, we will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production, filming, post-production, budget, box office collection of this film. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the ends. So let's start the video. American Gangster is a 2007 American biographical crime film directed and produced by Ridley Scott and written by Zaillian. The film is loosely based on the criminal career of Frank Lucas, a gangster from LaGrange, North Carolina, who smuggled heroin into the United States on American service planes returning from the Vietnam War, before being detained by a task force led by Newark detective Richie Roberts. The film stars Denzel Washington and Russell Crowe, with co-stars Ted Levine, John Ortiz, Josh Brolin, Chiwetel Ejiofor, Ruby Dee, Lamari Nadal, and Cuba Gooding Jr. Development for the film initially began in 2000, when Universal Pictures and Imagine Entertainment purchased the rights to a New York Magazine story about the rise and fall of Lucas. 2 years later, screenwriter Zaillian introduced a 170-page scriptment to Scott. Original production plans were to commence in Toronto for budget purposes. However, production eventually relocated permanently to New York City. Because of the film's rising budget, Universal canceled production in 2004. After negotiations with Terry George, it was later revived with Scott at the helm in March 2005. Principal photography commenced over a period of 5 months from July to December 2006. Filming took place throughout New York City and concluded in Thailand. American Gangster premiered in New York on October 20th, 2007, and was released in the United States on November 2nd. The film was well received by critics and grossed over $266 million worldwide. Many of the people portrayed, including Roberts and Lucas, have stated that the film took much creative license with the story, and 3 former DEA agents sued Universal, claiming the agency's portrayal was demoralizing. American Gangster was nominated for 21 awards, including 2 Oscar nominations for Best Art Direction and Best Supporting Actress for Ruby Dee, who also won a Screen Actors Guild Award for Outstanding Performance by a Female Actor in a Supporting Role. Plot: in 1968, Frank Lucas is the right-hand man of Harlem mob boss Ellsworth "Bumpy" Johnson. When Johnson dies of a heart attack, Frank enters the heroin trade, buying directly from producers in Thailand and smuggling it into the U.S. through returning Vietnam War servicemen. Frank sells his heroin under the brand Blue Magic, whose affordability and purity make it incredibly popular, eliminating much of his competition. Newark detective and aspiring lawyer Richie Roberts is ostracized in his precinct after handing in almost $1 million that he found in a mobster's car. Captain Lou Toback puts Roberts in charge of a special task force that targets major drug suppliers after Roberts' partner overdoses on Blue Magic. Roberts is also depicted having a bitter divorce battle with his ex-wife over his infidelity. Frank's heroin racket prospers. He eventually sells Blue Magic wholesale to many dealers in the New York tri-state area and expands his distribution through other criminal organizations. With this monopoly, Frank becomes Harlem's top crime lord, opening legitimate business fronts and maintaining a low profile, while befriending politicians and famous celebrities such as Joe Louis. He buys a mansion for his mother and recruits his 5 brothers as his lieutenants. Frank eventually falls in love with and marries Eva, a Puerto Rican beauty queen. He attends the fight of the century with her, where Roberts spots Frank, notices he has better seats than the Italian mobsters, and begins investigating him. Frank also comes to odds with competing local gangster Nicky Barnes, corrupt NYPD detective Nick Trupo, who is among many people Frank is forced to bribe, and the Corsican Mafia, who unsuccessfully attempt to assassinate Frank and his wife for putting them out of business. One night, Roberts detectives witness one of Frank's cousins, Jimmy Z, shoot his girlfriend. He becomes their informant in lieu of being convicted. They make Jimmy wear a wire, through which they learn that Frank has negotiated one final shipment of heroin after the fall of Saigon. They identify and search one of the last planes carrying Lucas's stock, discovering that it is being smuggled through the coffins of dead servicemen. They follow the drugs into Newark's projects and obtain a warrant to raid Frank's heroin processing facility, which results in the death of Frank's nephew, Stevie Lucas, and the arrest of Frank's brother, Huey. They then arrest the other four brothers and finally Frank himself. During a trial against Frank, Roberts offers him a chance at leniency if he will help him expose corrupt police officers, to which Frank agrees. Following Frank's cooperation, 3/4 of the New York DEA and many NYPD officers are arrested and convicted, while Trupo commits suicide. Roberts becomes a defense attorney and has Frank as his first client. Frank is sentenced to 70 years in prison, of which he serves 15 years and is released in 1991. Cast: Denzel Washington as Frank Lucas, Russell Crowe as Richie Roberts, Chiwetel Ejiofor as Huey Lucas, Josh Brolin as Detective Trupo, Limari Nadal as Eva, Ted Levine as Lou Toback, Roger Genver-Smith as Nate, John Hawkes as Freddie Spearman, as Moses Jones, Yul Vasquez as Alfonsia Brusso, Malcolm Goodwin as Jimmy Z, Ruby Dee as Mahalia Lucas, Frank's mother, Ruben Santiago Hudson as Doc, Carla Gugino as Lori Roberts, John Ortiz as Javier J. Rivera, Cuba Gooding Jr. as Nicky Barnes, Armand Asante as Dominic Catano, Joe Morton as Charlie Williams, Richie Coster as Joey Sadno, Idris Elba as Tango, Common as Turner Lucas, Tip Harris as Stevie Lucas, Kevin Corrigan as Campisi, Robert Finaro as McCann, John Polito as Rossi, K.D. Strickland as Richie's attorney, Norman Reedus as detective in morgue, Roger Bart as U.S. attorney, Rick Young as Kunsa, Clarence Williams III as Bumpy Johnson. Production, development, and writing. In 2000, Universal Pictures and Imagine Entertainment purchased the rights to The Return of Superfly by Mark Jacobson, an article published in New York Magazine story about the rise and fall of the 1970s heroin kingpin Frank Lucas. In 2002, screenwriter Steven Zaillian brought a 170-page script to director Ridley Scott, who expressed interest in making 2 films from it. However, Scott did not immediately pursue the project, choosing to make Kingdom of Heaven instead. In November 2003, Universal and Imagine entered negotiations with Brian De Palma to direct True Blue, with a script by Zaillian based on the life of Frank Lucas. Zaillian interpreted the account as one of American business and race, focusing the script thematically on corporate business. Production was initially slated for a spring 2004 start. In March 2004, the studio entered new negotiations with Antoine Fuqua to direct, as well as Denzel Washington to star in the film as Frank Lucas. The following May, Benicio del Toro entered negotiations to star as Detective Richie Roberts, who brought down Lucas. Production of True Blue was reset to begin in early fall 2004, with the film slated for a release date of June 3, 2005. In September 2004, Dania Ramirez entered negotiations to join the cast of the film, now titled American Gangster. Universal Pictures reported that it greenlit American Gangster with a budget of $80 million, which escalated to $93 million, with $10 million for development costs and $3 million for the delay of the production start date. Sources close to the director insist that the budget was $93 million from the beginning. The studio also sought for American Gangster to be produced in Toronto rather than New York City to save money, but Fuqua resisted the relocation. The studio's parent company, General Electric, received tax credits in New York City, so production was moved to the city. This change increased the budget to $98 million. Fuqua's camp insisted that it was seeking ways to reduce the budget, but the studio argued about several aspects of the project under him. The director had wanted to film a Vietnam sequence in Thailand and to cast notable names such as Ray Liotta and John C. Reilly in minor roles. To add to the studio's budgetary concerns, Fuqua was rewriting the script during the pre-production process. The director did not have a shot list, final locations, and supporting actors signed to initiate production. Fuqua was fired on October 1st, 2004, 4 weeks before principal photography would begin. The studio cited creative differences for its action. After Fuqua's departure, the studio met with Peter Berg to take over directing the film, and Denzel Washington had approved of the choice. Due to the search potentially escalating a budget already in the $80 million range and the difficulty in recouping the amount based on the film's subject matter, Universal canceled production of American Gangster, citing time constraints and creative elements. The cancellation cost the studio $30 million, of which $20 million went to Washington and $5 million went to Del Toro due to their pay-or-play contracts. In March 2005, American Gangster was revived as Universal, and Imagine entered negotiations with Terry George to revise Zaillian's script and direct the film, which was to be financed with a target budget of $50 million. Will Smith was approached to replace Washington as Frank Lucas, though an offer would be postponed until George completed his revision of the script. George cut many key scenes, characters, and Asian locations to reduce costs, but the project failed to progress given financial problems and producer Grazer feeling they couldn't make it right without the removed material. After Scott and Zaillian met on another project, Zaillian brought up the Gangster project again with Scott, who decided he was ready to do it. Producer Brian Grazer and Imagine executive Jim Whittaker decided against pursuing George's attempt and to return to Zaillian's vision. In February 2006, Ridley Scott entered talks with the studio to take over American Gangster from George, returning to Zaillian's draft as the film's basis. Washington returned to his role as Lucas, and Russell Crowe was attached to star as Roberts. Crowe was drawn to the project based on his previous work with the director on Gladiator and A Good Year. Washington wanted to work with Crowe again after 1995's Virtuosity. Production was slated for summer 2006. Scott had discussed the script with Crowe as they worked on A Good Year in France, and they sought to take on the project. The director reviewed Zaillian's script, Terry George's rewrite, and a revision by Richard Price during the project's incarnation with director Antoine Fuqua. Scott preferred Zaillian's approach and chose to follow it. The director encountered a challenge in the script, since the characters Frank Lucas and Richie Roberts do not encounter each other until 20 minutes before the end of the film. The director sought to flesh out the private universes of these characters, which would evolve, and to have scenes cut between the two characters to provide a balance. Elements such as Frank Lucas's interaction with his family and Richie Roberts's dysfunctional marriage were written to add to the characters' backgrounds. The rappers T.I., RZA, and Common were added to the cast to appeal to younger audiences. Scott chose to direct American Gangster by highlighting the paradoxical values of Frank Lucas and Richie Roberts. The film somewhat focuses on the comparatively ethical business practices of the wicked gangster and the womanizing and failed marriage of the do-gooder police detective. Washington, who was not normally a fan of gangster films, chose to portray Lucas when he saw the arc of the character, which ended by showing the prices that Lucas paid for his actions. To prepare for their roles, the actors met the actual persons. In addition, Washington took on Lucas's southern accent, and Crowe practiced to match Roberts' manner of speaking and body language, requesting tape recordings of Roberts to assist in his preparation. The following March, the studio rehired Zaillian to rewrite the script for American Gangster. The budget had escalated to $100 million, which Grazer stated was unexpected given it's not a high-concept comedy, it's not a fantasy movie, it's not a four-quadrant movie. Grazer and Scott still had to pay back the studio $3 million for a budget overrun. Filming. Principal photography began in July 2006 in New York City. American Gangster was filmed over a period of approximately 4 months in over 180 different locations, most of them across New York. It set the record for containing the highest number of filming locations of a movie. 2 months were spent in New York, with all the city's 5 boroughs being used. Approximately 50 to 60 locations were set in Harlem alone. While in the neighborhood, Scott stated that he found several interiors that had been untouched since the 1940s. According to production designer Arthur Max, exhaustive location scouting was done to find parts of New York that could still resemble the city of the early 1970s, filming Lucas's headquarters at 116th Street 20 blocks north on 136th Street. In his interview with ComingSoon.net, Scott stated that he just walked in and just showing the house. Several gas masks were brought by producers due to health hazards and sanitary concerns existing in the buildings. Scott found filming in Harlem to be difficult, commenting that the rapid gentrification in Harlem provided poor opportunities for shooting angles. Handheld cameras were extensively used to depict a guerrilla filmmaking style. Other locations for principal photography include the Brooklyn Navy Yard, the Nassau Veterans Memorial Coliseum, Old Westbury Gardens, a segment of the George Washington Bridge, and the Brooklyn Supreme Courthouse. Briarcliff Manor in upstate New York had the locations for both the Lucas farm and the estate Lucas buys for his family. Morgue scenes were filmed in Morristown, New Jersey. Filming locations began setting up in Thailand in November 2006, after Branko Lustig consulted with Suvit Yodmani, the country's tourism minister. Filming for American Gangster concluded in Chiang Mai the following month. Using his experience from visiting New York in the same time period in which the film's story took place, Scott sought to downplay a Beatles atmosphere to the film and to instead create a shabbier atmosphere, saying that Harlem was really shabby, beautiful brownstones falling apart. Production and costume design was emphasized, transforming the location into the rundown streets of Upper Manhattan from the late 1960s and early 1970s. Denzel Washington as Frank Lucas had 64 costume changes. Music. Further information. American Gangster. In 2006, Greg Calloway was approached by producers to produce a soundtrack for the film. He presented the idea to Atlantic Records chairman Craig Kallman, and one of the company's artists, T.I., got an acting role in the film. However, the deal did not go further because Universal Pictures owned the rights to the film. It was a Universal film, and they were not going to give the soundtrack to WMG, Atlantic's parent company. Thus, Scott brought back Mark Streitenfeld, who had worked with him in A Good Year. The composer stated that the overall tone needed to be something bigger and darker, given the characters' strong personalities, and while not being the original intention, he added shades of blues and soul music to fit the 1970s setting. The musical score for American Gangster was recorded between April and May 2007 by Streitenfeld, with the help of orchestrator Bruce Fowler and conductor Mike Nowak, using an 80-piece orchestra recorded in sections as well as acoustic pre-records performed by Streitenfeld himself. Additional score material was composed and recorded by Hank Shockley. The official soundtrack album for American Gangster was released by Def Jam Recordings within a week of the film's release. In addition to Streitenfeld and Shockley's score material, the soundtrack album also features songs influenced by music in the 1960s and 1970s, including from blues and soul musicians such as Bobby Womack, the Staple Singers Sam and Dave, and John Lee Hooker. Grazer stated that, "I wanted to introduce a visual and sonic world that is a contained entity of the 70s, and Scott felt it was vital to have the brand of music that was Harlem at the time." Denzel Washington pressed Grazer into inviting rapper Jay-Z to write the film's score, but the producer just didn't think there'd be enough for Jay-Z to do, given the intentions to do a soundtrack filled with 1970s music. The film's trailer had already used Jay-Z's Heart of the City, Ain't No Love, and the rapper was invited to an advanced screening. The film had a profound resonance on the musician, who decided to create a concept album also entitled American Gangster. The rapper recorded tracks that were prompted by specific scenes in the film. It was speculated that the album's release in conjunction with the film would attract a young audience and help Universal Pictures generate profits to recover from the film's troubled development history. According to Jay-Z, "It was like I was watching the film and putting it on pause and giving a backstory to the story. It immediately clicked with me. Like Scarface or any one of those films, you take the good out of it, and you can see it as an inspiring film." Release: American Gangster premiered in Harlem at the Apollo Theater on October 20th, 2007. Over 2 weeks before the release of American Gangster, a screener for the film leaked online. The film debuted in the United States and Canada on November 2nd, 2007 in 3,054 theaters. Home media: American Gangster was released in DVD and HD DVD format on February 19, 2008. The home release included an unrated extended version of the film, featuring 18 additional minutes and an alternative ending. The film topped both the DVD sales charts with 4 million units during its first week in stores, more than 3 times as many copies as second-place Michael Clayton, and the rental charts. American Gangster ended up as the 14th best-selling DVD of 2008. It also topped the high-definition charts, despite being released in the same week. Toshiba announced it would discontinue the HD DVD format. On October 14th, the film saw its release on Blu-ray. Video game: a mobile game based on the film was released by Gameloft on November 1st. Reception: box office. In its opening weekend in the United States and Canada, it grossed an estimated $43.6 million, averaging 14,264 per theater, placing the film first in the weekend box office. It marked the biggest opening weekend out of any film in both Washington and Crowe's careers. In its second week, grosses declined by 44.8% to $24 million, being beaten out by B-Movie. In contrast, by its third week, screenings for American Gangster increased to 3,110 theaters as the film surpassed the $100 million mark. American Gangster finished its box office run in North America with $130,164,645. The film experienced similar success overseas. American Gangster was released in the United Kingdom on November 16th and became the highest-grossing film of the week, garnering $2.6 million, $5.3 million in the box office. It repeated the feat in its second week, grossing an estimated $1.82 million, $3.7 million, at the box office and beating out Beowulf 2 consecutive times. The weekend of November 16-18 saw American Gangster take $14.7 million from 14 territories internationally. At the same time, American Gangster expanded in the European market. It received $2.8 million from 366 theaters in Germany and $3.6 million from 366 screens in France during its opening weekend. Releases followed in Norway and Sweden the succeeding week, where it earned $392,608 and $465,238 from 37 and 59 theaters, respectively. The film was released in the United Arab Emirates during the film's sixth week and grossed a modest $281,922 at the box office during its first week in the Emirate. Similarly, it earned $6.9 million in international markets during its sixth week, adding the total at the time to $40.9 million. 008 American Gangster opened in 37 markets, bringing international grosses to $93 million. In February, screenings for the film debuted in Mexico with a modest $820,482 opening weekend, and Japan, where it opened at the box office with $2.3 million, landing in second place. American Gangster grossed over $266.5 million worldwide at the box office, with international grosses making up 51%, $136.3 million. It ranked as the 19th highest-grossing film of 2007, both domestically and worldwide. Critical response. Review aggregate. Rotten Tomatoes reports that 81% of critics have given the film a positive review based on 218 reviews, with a rating average of 7.0 per 10, with the consensus being, American Gangster is a gritty and entertaining throwback to classic gangster films, with its lead performers firing on all cylinders. On Metacritic, which assigns a weighted mean score out of 100 to reviews from film critics, the film has a score of 76 based on 38 reviews. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of B+ on an A+ to F scale. Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times gave the film a perfect 4-star rating and opined, "This is an engrossing story, told smoothly and well." Ebert also praised Crowe's performance, saying that his contribution to the storytelling was enormous. Paul Burns of the Sydney Morning Herald felt that American Gangster was one of the most intelligent gangster films in years, and expressed that the film offers the spectacle of grand themes and two bigger-than-life characters played by two of the best actors in cinema. Concluding his review, Burns gave the film 4 out of 4 stars. IGN's Jim Stacks Voda rated the film 4 out of 5 stars, praising the acting, particularly of the two protagonists, both dynamic presences on screen, with neither actor outweighing the other's importance to the story, and declaring that despite being preceded by other gangster stories such as Scarface and The Sopranos, American Gangster managed to justify its existence with emphasis on the human and class elements of the story. Manohla Dargis of the New York Times strongly commended the film, opinining that greatness hovers just outside American Gangster. She continued, "It's a seductive package, crammed with all the on-screen and off-screen talent that big studio money can buy, and filled with old soul and remixed funk that evoke the city back in the day, when heroin turned poor streets white and sometimes red." These sentiments were echoed by Sukhdev Sandhu of The Telegraph, who asserted that the storyline was amazing. In comparison, some reviewers were more critical of American Gangster. Jonathan Crocker of Time Out London was polarized with the film, criticizing its aesthetics. In his review, he wrote, "Scott's meticulous aesthetics can't touch the urban texture and deep focus of The French Connection, The Godfather, Serpico, and Prince of the City, all looming heavily in intertextual nods." In contrast, Crocker praised Washington's acting, writing, "He's immense," centering every scene with tractor beam charisma, that dangerous, easy charm hovering between a luxury smile or blazing violence. In conclusion, Crocker gave the film 3 out of 5 stars. Similarly, Owen Gleiberman of Entertainment Weekly gave the film a C- grade, expressing that American Gangster is never dull, but it could have used more good old-fashioned melodramatic intrigue. Gleiberman found Washington's performance to have a ghastly ingenuity. Empire's Ian Freer rated the film 3 stars out of 5. He stated that it was undeniably enjoyable and praised the cast, but also noted that he felt that very little in the movie feels fresh, retreading scenes, riffs, and imagery from the whole history of crime flicks, and that the film did not explore enough of Lucas's story and Scott's visual imagination. Slant magazine journalist Nick Shager harshly criticized the film, giving the film a 1 out of 4 stars rating. Shager remarked that the film was dumb as a rock and that it was far too convinced of its import to be any fun. Giving American Gangster a 2 out of 5 stars, Peter Bradshaw of The Guardian was disappointed with Washington's acting, asserting, "He doesn't seem to relax and enjoy himself in the role or even inhabit it very satisfyingly." He resumed, "He never has the menace of his dirty cop in Training Day, and we don't see anything like the transformation from street hustler to leader in Malcolm X. That shoulder-shimmying swagger is rarely seen, and the brand classic robes of American Gangster sit on him heavily." Accuracy of the film. Lucas admitted to several news outlets that only a small portion of the film was true, 63, and that much of it was fabricated for dramatic effect. In addition, Richie Roberts criticized the film for portraying him in a custody battle, while in real life he never had a child. Roberts criticized the portrayal of Lucas, describing it as almost noble. Sterling Johnson Jr., a federal judge who served as a special narcotics prosecutor for the United States District Court for the Eastern District of New York and assisted the arrest and trial of Lucas, described the film as 1% reality and 99% Hollywood. In addition, Johnson described the real-life Lucas as illiterate, vicious, violent, and everything Denzel Washington was not. Former DEA agents Jack Toll, Gregory Korniloff, and Louis Diaz filed a lawsuit against Universal saying that the events in the film were fictionalized and that the film defamed them and hundreds of other agents. The lawsuit was eventually dismissed by U.S. District Judge Colleen McMahon, while McMahon noted that the intertitle that appears at the end of the film, stating that Lucas's collaboration led to the arrest of many corrupt DEA agents, was wholly inaccurate, in that Lucas's cooperation did not lead to the convictions, and opined that it would behoove a major corporation like Universal, which is owned by a major news organization, NBC, not to put inaccurate statements at the end of popular films. She stated that the film failed to meet legal standards of defamation because it failed to show a single person who is identifiable as a DEA agent. Many of Lucas's other claims, as presented in the film, have also been called into question, such as being the right-hand man of Bumpy Johnson, rising above the power of the Mafia and Nicky Barnes, and that he was the mastermind behind the Golden Triangle heroin connection of the 1970s. Ron Chepesiuk, a biographer of Frank Lucas, deemed the story a myth. Associated Press entertainment writer Frank Coyle noted that this mess happened partly because journalists have been relying on secondary sources removed from the actual events. Accolades: American Gangster earned various awards and nominations in categories ranging from recognition of the film itself to its screenplay and music to the performances of Ruby Dee and Denzel Washington. Prior to the film's release, it was observed as a candidate for the Academy Awards based on its style and the performances of its actors, including the possibility of an Academy Award for Best Director for Ridley Scott. The film was recognized as a candidate for Best Film by the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People and the Broadcast Film Critics Association. In addition, the film was included on 54 reviewer lists of the 10 best films of 2007, 3 of them at the top spot. Among the lists ranking American Gangster as one of the best of the year were those of the Miami Herald, Rolling Stone, and the Associated Press. Here's a startlingly original true-life story told in an oddly unoriginal way, and that attempt at instant classic status in the title doesn't quite convince. It's got no more dark grandeur than American Idol. The film is about the 1970s Harlem drug lord Frank Lucas and Richie Roberts, the straight-arrow cop who took him down. Lucas's career is heavily pregnant with one irresistible metaphor. He claimed to have directly imported high-grade heroin into the United States from the Far East during the Vietnam War, hiding the drugs in the flag-bedecked coffins of fallen American troops, containers that naturally no one dared touch. Criminals tend also to be liars, of course, and it is possible that this particular juicy detail may be exaggerated or just invented, but director Ridley Scott has taken the inner-city urban myth at face value in this muscular period drama starring Denzel Washington as New York's Emperor of Smack, and Russell Crowe as the rumpled officer coming after him. Wide collars and center partings are much in evidence. President Nixon is always making jowly appearances on TV sets, and Steve Zaillian's script has Roberts, while giving chase to a cash-laden car, shouting to his own driver, "Follow the money," in sly tribute to the Watergate catchphrase. There's so much sweaty, pugnacious masculinity in the air, the testosterone is condensing and running down the windows in rivulets. Scott has shuffled the classic scenes and tropes of the gangster movie and dealt them like a deck of playing cards. There's a big face-off between old-school bad guy and old-school good guy in the manner of Michael Mann. There are nightclub scenes and epiphanic glimpses of beautiful women, blasts of pop music, and plenty of nostalgic voiceover montage, explaining how the wise guys' scams worked, in the manner of Scorsese. And further back than that, there are church-going gangsters presiding over pious family events, intercut with horrible shootings in the style of Coppola. There is even a bit of Lachrymose brass on the soundtrack, which somehow makes you think of oranges rolling all over the sidewalk. It's not cliched exactly, it's just very, very familiar. And the one part that might make it unique, make it fascinating, the Vietnamese connection, and military personnel arranging to stuff drugs into GI's coffins, all this is hardly touched on at all. The film stays very much on the familiar mean streets of New York City. When Washington's frowning mobster makes his one visit to Thailand, meeting with the local grower, he concludes his business with his characteristic grin, "My man," but adds that he doesn't want to drag his ass out there ever again. Clearly, Ridley Scott feels much the same way. Villain and cop are both outsiders. As a black man, Lucas is the underdog, massively patronized and then hated by the white mafia he outflanks. Roberts is Jewish, an identity signaled by just 2 touches, a Star of David neck chain glimpsed while he rose with his estranged wife near the start, and a white bigot calling him a keek near the end. Whatever their actual reputation for anti-Semitism, the Harlem African-Americans voice no such slurs on Roberts' religion in this film, preserving the important solidarity between the 2 men. It's not just a question of 2 alpha males grudgingly respecting each other. Roberts wants to arrest Lucas so that he can expose the massive network of corrupt police officers who leech on Lucas's drug money. That may well have been precisely his motive in real life. Here it makes for a questionable moral equivalence between these 2 charismatic street warriors. The real villains are obviously supposed to be the hapless Italian-Americans and one straightforwardly horrible bent copper, played by Josh Brolin. What is disappointing is Washington himself. He doesn't seem to relax and enjoy himself in the role, or even inhabit it very satisfyingly. He never has the menace of his dirty cop in Training Day, and we don't see anything like the transformation from street hustler to leader in Malcolm X. That shoulder-shimmying swagger is rarely seen, and the brand classic robes of American Gangster sit on him heavily. He looks as though he is trying to be that most un-American of things, royalty. Crowe, by contrast, is looser, paunchier, feistier. His suits are cheaper, fit less well, and he doesn't give a damn. There is one very good moment. Cautious Lucas can hardly contain his rage at the flashy, attention-grabbing clothes being worn by his excitable younger brother Huey, Chiwetel Ejiofor. He tells him they scream, "Arrest me!" But then, in a moment of weakness, he agrees to wear a showy chinchilla fur coat and matching hat to an alley fight, an outfit picked out for him by his wife, and which is so colorful you might assume it's for her, not him. Against his better judgment, he wears it, and catastrophically attracts the attention of cops, both clean and dirty. It is the beginning of the end, and furious at himself, Lucas throws the staggeringly expensive garment into the fire, but the event never packs the punch that it should have done. Just occasionally, with a kind of guilty start, Scott shows the victims of drugs, poor black people living in squalor. But proposing the gangster as a scary but somehow thrillingly real American design classic is uneasy and uninspired. Apart from the detail that he was a heroin dealer, Frank Lucas' career would be an ideal case study for a business school. American Gangster tells his success story. Inheriting a crime empire from his famous boss Bumpy Johnson, he cornered the New York drug trade with admirable capitalist strategies. He personally flew to Southeast Asia to buy his product directly from the suppliers, used an ingenious importing scheme to get it into the United States, and sold it at higher purity and lower cost than anyone else was able to. At the end, he was worth more than $150 million and got a reduced sentence by cutting a deal to expose 3/4 of the NYPD narcotics officers as corrupt. And he always took his mom to church on Sunday. Lucas is played by Denzel Washington in another one of those performances where he is affable and smooth on the outside, yet ruthless enough to set an enemy on fire. Here's a detail. As the man goes up in flames, Frank shoots him to put him out of his agony. Now, that's merciful. His stubborn antagonist in the picture is a police detective named Richie Roberts, Russell Crowe, who gets a very bad reputation in the department. How does he do that? By finding $1 million in drug money and turning it in. What the hell kind of a thing is that to do, when the usual practice would be to share it with the boys? There is something inside Roberts that will not bend, not even when his powerful colleague, Josh Brolin, threatens him. He vows to bring down Frank Lucas, and he does, although it isn't easy, and his most troubling opposition comes from within the police. Lucas, the student of the late Bumpy, has a simple credo: treat people right, keep a low profile, adhere to sound business practices, and hand out turkeys on Thanksgiving. He can trust the people who work for him because he pays them very well, and many of them are his relatives. In the movie, at least, Lucas is low-key and soft-spoken. No rings on his fingers, no gold around his neck, no spinners on his hubcaps, with a quiet marriage to a sweet wife and a Brooks Brothers image. It takes the authorities the longest time to figure out who he is, because they can't believe an African American could hijack the Harlem drug trade from the Mafia. The Mafia can't believe it either, but Frank not only pulls it off, but is still alive at the end. When it was first announced, Ridley Scott's film was inevitably called The Black Godfather. Not really. For one thing, it tells two parallel stories, not one. And it really has to, because without Roberts, there would be no story to tell, and Lucas might still be in business. But that doesn't save us from a stock female character who is becoming increasingly tiresome in the movies. The wife, Carla Gugino, who wants Roberts to choose between his job and his family. Their obligatory scenes together are recycled from a dozen or 100 other plots, and although we sympathize with her, will they all be targeted for assassination? We grow restless during her complaints. Roberts' domestic crisis is not what the movie is about. It is about an extraordinary entrepreneur whose story was told in a New York Magazine article by Mark Jacobson. As adapted into a somewhat fictionalized by Steve Zaillian, Schindler's List, Lucas is a loyal driver, bodyguard, and coat holder for Bumpy Johnson, who has inspired characters in 3 other movies, including The Cotton Club. He listens carefully to Johnson's advice, cradles him when he is dying, then takes over and realizes the fatal flaw in the Harlem drug business. The goods come in through the Mafia, after having been stepped on all along the way. So he flies to Thailand, goes upriver for a face-to-face with the general in charge of drugs, and is rewarded for this seemingly foolhardy risk with an exclusive contract. The drugs will come to the United States inside the coffins of American casualties, which is apparently based on fact. It's all arranged by one of his relatives. In terms of his visible lifestyle, the story of Frank Lucas might as well be the story of J.C. Penney, except that he hands out turkeys instead of pennies. Everyone in his distribution chain is reasonably happy because the product is high quality, the price is right, and there's money for everyone. Ironically, an epidemic of overdoses occurs when Lucas's high-grade stuff is treated by junkies as if it's the usual weaker street strength. Then, Lucas starts practicing what marketing experts call branding. It becomes known that his Blue Magic offers twice the potency at half the price, and other suppliers are forced off the streets by the rules of the marketplace, not turf wars. This is an engrossing story, told smoothly and well, and Russell Crowe's contribution is enormous. It's not his fault his wife complains. Looking like a careworn bulldog, his Richie Roberts studies for a law degree, remains inviolate in his ethical standards, and just keeps plugging away, building his case. The film ends not with a Scarface-style shootout, but with Frank and Richie sitting down for a long, intelligent conversation, written by Zaillian to show 2 smart men who both know the score. As I hinted above, less The Godfather than Wall Street, although for that matter a movie named American Gangster could have been made about Kenneth Lay. Greatness hovers just outside American Gangster, angling to be let in. Based in rough outline on the flashy rise and fall of a powerful 1970s New York drug lord Frank Lucas, the film has been built for importance with a brand-name director Ridley Scott and 2 major stars, Denzel Washington as Lucas and Russell Crowe as Richie Roberts, the New Jersey cop who brings him down. It's a seductive package crammed with all the on-screen and off-screen talent that big studio money can buy, and filled with old soul and remixed funk that evoke the city back in the day when heroin turned poor streets white and sometimes red. This being an American story, as its title announces and Steven Zaillian's screenplay occasionally trumpets, there's plenty of blue in the mix too, worn by some of New York's very unfinest. Mr. Lucas was among the city's most notorious underworld hustlers, but one of the film's points, at times you could call it a message, is that he was just doing what everyone with ambition, flair, and old-fashioned American entrepreneurial spirit was doing, including cops. Getting a piece of the action. His piece just happened to be bigger than most, stretching across Harlem and snaking into other neighborhoods, into alleys and apartments where someone with ready cash and a hungry vein was always aching to get high. You see a few of those veins, popping, all but jumping in anticipation of another hit. Sometimes the needle slides into a clean arm, though every so often the camera comes uncomfortably close as a spike jabs into a suppurating wound. You could call these images metaphoric, something about the oozing, bleeding body of the exploited underclass, but mostly they're just graphic evidence of the damage done. Despite the intermittent nod to someone nodding out and even dying, this isn't about the suffering of addicts or of those forced to watch their neighborhoods perish alongside them. It's about good guys and bad, a classic story of white hats and blacks squaring off at the corral at 116th Street and 8th Avenue. Mr. Crowe, his jaw thrust forward as aggressively as his pelvis, wears the white hat, while the silky, smooth-moving, smooth-talking Mr. Washington wears the black. They're irresistible, though neither possesses the movie because each occupies a separate, if parallel, storyline. Mr. Washington has the more developed and dynamic role, which he inhabits easily, whether flashing his wolfish grin or draining the affect from Lucas's face to show the soulless operator beneath the swagger and suit. Lucas's rival, Nicky Barnes, Cuba Gooding Jr., in a sharp, small turn, wore the pimp threads and fedoras the size of manhole covers. He also read Machiavelli. Lucas dressed like the businessman he believed himself to be and was. Formally, the plot takes the shape of a simple braid, with Lucas's and Roberts' stories serving as individual narrative strands that become more and more tightly plated. Complicating this simple, at times overly mechanical back-and-forth design is a third player with a smaller strand, a corrupt New York detective, Trupo, Josh Brolin in a knockout performance, who shakes down Lucas and other larcenous types. The baddest bad man in town, a thug's thug, Trupo wears his power as confidently as the long black leather coat he whips on for battle. He hassles Lucas, who hates him in turn, and openly indulges his contempt for Roberts because the other cop is honest, which means he's a threat to Trupo and his kind. It's hard not to fall for these men pumping like pistons across the screen, which is as much part of the movie's allure as its problem. Mr. Scott doesn't escape the contradiction that bedevils almost every Hollywood movie about gangsters, which cry shame, shame as they parade their stars, crank the soul, and showcase the foxy ladies, the swank digs and rides. Mr. Washington obviously enjoys sinking into villainy, but he never finds the lower depths. There's little of the frightening menace the actor brought to Training Day, where you see the pleasure his character derives from his sadism. Even when Lucas goes ballistic, beating a man to pulp, the film tosses in a laugh about the proper way to clean a bloodied rug. Seriousness has always been one of Mr. Scott's strengths as a director, but when his material has skewed too light, too frivolous, the gravity and purpose etched into each one of his meticulous, beautiful images have also helped sink films. He couldn't make an ironic gesture if he wanted to, or toss off an idea or a shot. Everything counts, even if it shouldn't. Such was the case with his and Mr. Crowe's last collaboration, their 2006 Provençal Folly, A Good Year, a soufflé made with lead. Mr. Scott makes the case for his and his new film's seriousness in its opener, which shows Lucas tossing a match at a man who has been doused with gasoline and then pumping bullets into the burning, screaming figure. This is the match that ignites the story of a criminal overlord who, without mercy or remorse, takes down one human being after another, many of whom, like the addicts he supplied, were as helpless as that burning man. By rights, this match should also ignite a tragedy, and you can almost feel Mr. Scott trying to coax the material away from its generic trappings towards something rarefied, something like Francis Ford Coppola's 1972 definitive American story. The Godfather. He comes closest to that goal with the suggestion that the lethal pursuit of the American dream is not restricted to one or two families, the Corleones, say, or the Sopranos, but located in a network of warring tribes that help to obscure the larger war of all against all. The America in this film isn't a melting or even a boiling pot. It's a bitter object lesson about the logic of market-driven radical individualism, wherein a self-styled Horatio Alger type, thwarted by racial prejudice and born into poverty in North Carolina, grows up to become a powerful captain of the illegal drug industry. Lucas pulls himself up by his bootstraps, a gun tucked into his belt, and becomes a folk hero and a pop culture idol who doles out free turkeys to the very community he helps enslave with narcotics, fear, and despair. He gathers his relatives around to help him, modeling himself after the mafia families with whom he does business. He builds a gang, but only so it can serve his personal desires. The bottom line of what a Frank Lucas does, to people, to neighborhoods, doesn't make for entertainment. And so, despite Mr. Scott's talent for trouble and shadows, the cinematographer Harris Savides bleeds all the bright color from this world, he soon loosens his grip on Lucas. He lingers over the garish surfaces and violence and the exotic locales where Lucas found a steady supply of pure heroin. He quotes Superfly, fires up Bobby Womack, samples Richard M. Nixon, and tosses in a pinch of Black Power rhetoric to mask the rot. He distracts and entertains until the divide between his seriousness of purpose and the false glamour that wafts around American gangsters and invariably trivializes their brutality becomes too wide to breach. Like many movie makers and watchers, Mr. Scott loves his bad guy too much. And by turning Lucas into a figure who seduces instead of repels, an object of directorial fetishism and a token of black resistance, however hollow, he encourages us to submit as well. Part of this is structural and economic. Blood and nihilism are always better sells than misery and hopelessness. Yet there's also a historical dimension, because when Lucas strolls down a fast, emptying Harlem street after putting a bullet into another man's head and the camera pulls back for the long view, you are transported into the realm of myth. Once, another gunman, or the director, might have taken direct aim at Lucas, but the world belongs to gangsters now, not cowboys. After a long development process marked by fits and starts, American Gangster has finally shot its way onto the big screen, courtesy of director Ridley Scott and screenwriter Steve Zaillian. The great ensemble cast is led by Denzel Washington and Russell Crowe, last seen together on screen in the abysmal Virtuosity. Fortunately, the second time's the charm for these two hugely talented Oscar winners. Based on Mark Jacobson's New York Magazine article, The Return of Superfly, American Gangster chronicles the true story of Frank Lucas. Washington, an African-American entrepreneur who rose to prominence in the 1960s and 70s in a field that was dominated by whites, heroin trafficking. Employing the lessons he'd learned by working for legendary gangster Bumpy Johnson, Clarence Williams III, and his mafia overlords, Frank uses his astute business acumen and propensity for guilt-free violence to rise to the top of his industry. The war in Vietnam provides Frank, who had a relative stationed in Bangkok, with the opportunity to beat his competition. Frank imports heroin directly from its point of origin, often smuggling it in the remains of dead U.S. soldiers, cutting out his competitors and offering his customers a product that hasn't been degraded. It's a business strategy that ultimately makes Frank more powerful and richer than La Cosa Nostra. Frank isn't just the king of Harlem, he becomes the biggest heroin dealer in the country. Business is so good that Frank brings his brothers, Chiwetel Ejiofor, Common, T.I., Warner Miller, Albert Jones, and J. Kyle Manze in to help him run things, and he's able to buy his poor mother, Ruby Dee, an estate. Frank's success earns him newfound enemies, criminals jealous of his empire, and dirty cops, led by Josh Brolin, who want their cut. Not all the cops are corrupt, however. Richie Roberts is an honest cop who also happens to be a philandering husband, aspiring attorney, and lifelong friends with one of the biggest Italian mobsters in New Jersey. Richie finds himself leading a federal task force charged with discovering and busting the source of a potent and pure form of heroin labeled Blue Magic. The man behind Blue Magic, Frank Lucas, isn't even on the cops' radar until he makes one fateful wardrobe decision. The rest of the film chronicles Richie and his team's long hunt to understand the structure and players of Frank's organization and to find a way to finally bring him down. If busted, what will Frank do? Go out in a blaze of glory, or play ball and take down as many rivals and enemies as he can? Screenwriter Zaillian has always been drawn to morally ambiguous anti-heroes. The Falcon and the Snowman, Schindler's List, and All the King's Men, and the protagonists of American Gangster are no exception. While it's clear that the film comes down on the side of the law, Frank is humanized enough that we understand why he is the way he is. That's not to say we come to love him. Indeed, it's a full hour into the movie before we witness Frank's more human side and learn more of his backstory. We come to admire Frank's business savvy and shrewdness more than to actually like anything about him as a person, although he does love his mama. And while Richie may be an honorable cop, he's far from a saint. It's as if he makes up for his own flaws and deceits as a man and a husband by trying to be a better cop. Washington and Crowe are both dynamic presences on screen, with neither actor outweighing the other's importance to the story. There is only one egregious actory moment in Washington's performance, and it's an old trick that he's pulled before. He has a loud, gesticulating Pacino moment when Frank rages about an ambush that nearly killed his wife. It's surprising that Scott didn't catch that or prod his leading man to try it a different way. As solid as Washington and Crowe are, however, the supporting players shine just as brightly. Particularly memorable are John Ortiz, the villainous Jose Hierro in 2006's Miami Vice as Crowe's troubled partner, and Josh Brolin, who has enjoyed a career renaissance playing greasy scumbags as perhaps the dirtiest cop in a city full of them. Both actors not only hold their own against the bigger name leads, but even come close to stealing a few scenes from them. Also noteworthy are Ejiofor, Common, and T.I. as Frank's brothers, and Cuba Gooding Jr., clearly enjoying his best role since Pearl Harbor as Frank's flashy rival Nicky Barnes. Williams III has a small but important role as Frank's mentor, Bumpy Johnson, the subject of the film Hoodlum, which also co-starred Williams. Gangster movies have never offered actresses much to do outside of playing the mole, the femme fatale, or the suffering wife-girlfriend. American Gangster is no exception, with Carla Gugino and relative newcomer Limari Nadal playing the suffering wives of Richie and Frank, respectively. Faring much better is Ruby Dee as Frank's elderly mother, a simple woman who is enjoying material comforts for once in her hardscrabble life and is willfully blind to how her son earns such a fortune. The film certainly deals with the issue of race, but it's almost more about class. Indeed, dollar green is the color that ultimately overrides all others in this story. American Gangster is not Scott's Black Caesar or Scarface. As packed with street violence and drug dealing as it is, the film is more concerned with the socio-political and economic factors motivating Frank and fueling his empire than it is in underworld intrigue or excessive gunplay. The movie truly is about an American gangster. It's a business movie about unbridled capitalism that's been dressed up as the highbrow answer to Superfly. It's that emphasis on the human and class elements of the story that lift American Gangster above its B-movie trappings and help justify why, after The Godfather, Scarface, Goodfellas, Casino, and The Sopranos, we need to see yet another epic project about an unrepentant criminal living and thriving by the sword. American Gangster is compelling in the same way that many mob-related motion pictures are compelling, but it fails to achieve the greatness that the best of them attain. The problem with American Gangster may be that it tries too hard to provide balance between the protagonist and the antagonist, but never really achieves it. While the story is rarely dull, and there's plenty of material to fill up the more than 2.5-hour running time, there's an overall absence of dramatic tension. Ridley Scott rarely creates an uninteresting motion picture, and this is no exception. But American Gangster will not go down as one of the respected director's best efforts. The cast is headlined by 2 Oscar winners, Denzel Washington as Harlem drug lord Frank Lucas, and Russell Crowe as North Jersey drug cop Richie Roberts. The time period is the early 1970s, with drug use escalating on the streets of New York even as the interminable war in Vietnam drags on. The framework of American Gangster bears the "based on a true story" moniker, and Lucas, now in his 70s, was one of the film's advisors, but numerous liberties have been taken with the historical record. Some of these are effective, but others create head-scratching contrivances that are hard to swallow even for someone who easily suspends disbelief. Example: would an arresting officer be allowed to try the arrested individual as his first case after passing the bar, especially when it's a major drug case? For many years, Frank has been the driver for mobster Bumpy Johnson. When a heart attack fells Bumpy, Frank uses his contacts and knowledge to carve out a niche in the Harlem drug market, but his circumstances are fragile, with other black mobsters and the mafia threatening to squeeze him out. To make his position unassailable, Frank executes a bold move. He travels to Bangkok to set up a direct deal with the drug producers, cutting out the middlemen. In order to transport the drugs into the United States, he uses the army, which is constantly ferrying men and equipment to Vietnam. Suddenly, Frank has the purest heroin on the streets of New York, and he can sell it cheaper than any of his competitors. It doesn't take long before mafioso Dominic Catano, Armand Assant, is working for him. Meanwhile, in New Jersey, Richie has become a pariah for turning in $1 million in unmarked drug money, which was designated for cop payoffs. He is transferred to a newly formed narcotics squad and gets to pick his own men. Their goal: take down the highest-placed drug lord they can get evidence against, and their sights are eventually trained on Frank. But Richie has problems, both professional and personal. His ex-wife, Carla Gugino, is suing him for custody of his son. He is not well respected by his peers, and his New York City equivalent, Detective Trupo, Josh Brolin, is on the take. Frank's portion of the story is energetic and intense. We are treated to a lot of little details about the drug trade that recall the behind-the-scenes look at gambling offered by Martin Scorsese in Casino. For example, all the women cutting and packaging the drugs in Frank's workshop do so in the nude, so they can't steal any to take home. Frank is a fascinating and charismatic character in the best tradition of screen mobsters. For the most part, he is gentlemanly and courteous. He loves his wife, Laimari Nadal, and his mother, Ruby Dee. But there are times when he snaps and his dark side shows, as in a scene when he brutally eliminates a rival in broad daylight in the middle of a crowd. Unfortunately, Richie is rather dull, and the segments featuring his story aren't nearly as interesting. It's odd to find such a volatile and forceful actor as Russell Crowe stuck in a low-key performance. There's nothing wrong with Crowe's acting. Like Washington, he's very good. The problem is the character and this aspect of the plot. It's inferior, and the film's level of energy declines palpably every time the scene switches from Frank to Richie. These two are set up as rivals, but they never seem equally matched in their chess game. If there's an acting surprise, it's Josh Brolin, who digs his teeth into the role of Trupo and tears at it with relish. All that's missing is the black hat. Frank is more of an anti-hero than a villain, a self-made man who has pulled himself up by his bootstraps and spreads around the wealth. The movie allows us to sympathize with him while never forgetting what he is. There's a brilliant sequence that contrasts Frank's cutting of the Thanksgiving turkey with users dying of overdoses on his drugs. Trupo, on the other hand, is a true bad guy. A black-hearted opportunist with a gun who lords his power over everyone in an era when killing a cop was almost unheard of. Scott's intention is to build the story to its climax by contrasting Richie and Frank as he brings them into conflict with each other. It doesn't work as well as the director would like because the material is uneven and the conflict lacks potency. There's never a sense that these two are in opposition, at least not until the end. That dulls the film's edge. And it's hard to deny that American Gangster is a better motion picture when it is centered on Frank than on Richie. While the decision to focus on a black gangster isn't original, the way in which Frank is developed is unique, and that's the primary reason why the film works. Characters whose personalities mix so many contradictory and volatile elements are always the most interesting. That's what has made Michael Corleone one of the all-time best screen gangsters, and there's more than a little of this in Frank. Like in Training Day and Malcolm X, where he portrayed less than perfect individuals, Washington rules the screen. His portrayal is one of many things that elevates this film to the level of being consistently entertaining and occasionally compelling. What I remember most about the release of American Gangster has nothing to do with the story itself. It doesn't have to deal with any scene or moment within the movie. It doesn't even deal with Jay-Z's concept album that was inspired by the film. The thing I remember most about this movie was looking at the box office numbers the weekend it came out. Now, I'm not positive if this was the first time I ever looked at the box office numbers, but it feels like it was. I remember it vividly because at the time it was the best opening for both Denzel Washington and Russell Crowe, two movie stars at the peak of their career. After the release of American Gangster, looking at the box office estimates every Sunday morning became a regular routine for me. It was like looking at the final box score for an NBA game. The thing that guaranteed good business at the box office back in 2007 was almost always star power. This was at a time when studios like Universal, who released American Gangster, would spend hundreds of millions of dollars on the development and production of a period crime drama as long as it had a great director and stars behind it, because they knew that's what brought audiences to the theaters. Denzel Washington was one of the big stars that my friends and I grew up watching. Growing up in the South, we probably saw Remember the Titans multiple times a year, because our school teachers were fine with showing a movie like that. Denzel was an actor we all admired when I was in high school, as was Russell Crowe. Crowe was just coming off a phenomenal acting run around the time of the film's release, releasing 10 movies in an 8-year span. During that time, Crowe received 3 Academy Award nominations and 1 win, 5 Golden Globe nominations and 1 win, and a number of box office successes. Very few actors have been able to go on a run of that nature ever since. Like Scarface before it, American Gangster gained popularity within the rap culture at the time. Jay-Z's concept album regarding the film helped that tremendously. The difference was that this time it was an African-American male in the lead role. The story of Frank Lucas, the real-life character that Denzel Washington portrayed, was something audiences were after. People wanted to see the true story of how an African-American man, played by one of the greatest actors of our time, was able to rise up and do something that no other man in the American Mafia was able to do, even if it was all illegal. The title is catchy but misleading. Frank Lucas was less an American gangster than an original old gangster in Sable, a caricature in the tradition of 70s blaxploitation flicks. He is in fact a real-life character, an apparently highly attractive person, likable even, who made millions by killing people and ruining lives with the powdered death of heroin. Going up against this all-powerful yet ghostly figure who operates outside the old mafia networks is Richie Roberts, an incorruptible cop from the street who is determined to put him in prison. Director Ridley Scott takes on these familiar subjects, themes, and characters with a keen eye for the social fabric, false assumptions, suffocating corruption, and vivid personalities that make such a story worth retelling. So this is a gangster movie focused on character rather than action and on the intricacies of people's backgrounds, strategies, and motivations. Whether it means to, the film plays off a clutch of old movies, from The Godfather and Serpico to Superfly and Shaft. But Scott and writer Steven Zaillian make certain their old gangster is original and true to himself and his times, rather than a concoction of movie fiction. Consequently, the movie is smooth and smart enough to attract a significant audience beyond the considerable fan base of its stars, Denzel Washington and Russell Crowe. You do sense in this movie that its principles are returning to safe harbor. After a discouraging foray into feeble comedy by Scott and Crowe, A Good Year, and gothic southern melodrama for Zaillian, All the King's Men, these artists scramble back to an emotional naturalism more aligned to their sensibilities. Even for Washington, who seldom makes a false step career-wise, the film represents a welcome return to the larger-than-life villainy he performed so well in 2001's Training Day. Zaillian, working from Mark Jacobson's magazine Portrait of Lucas, a heroin kingpin of Harlem in the late 60s and early 70s, sets two men on a collision course. Lucas Washington, a country lad from North Carolina, is the nearly invisible driver and right-hand man to Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, the most famous of Harlem gangsters. So famous that this is his fourth movie reincarnation. Moses Gunn played him in Shaft, and Lawrence Fishburne Twy. Meanwhile, Richie Roberts, Crowe, a street-smart drug cop in New Jersey, is Frank's opposite. He can't help alienating everyone who crosses his path. His wife wants a divorce, insisting he leads a life entirely unsuitable to the welfare of their only child. Fellow cops shun him from the moment he brings in nearly $1 million of recovered drug money. No one can understand why he didn't keep it, which says a lot about the state of policing in the New York, New Jersey area in 1968. Frank's stroke of genius in the drug trade is to cut out the middleman. He flies to Thailand, takes a boat up the river in the Golden Triangle, makes a deal with a Chinese general, then arranges through an in-law to ship the kilos to New York in military planes coming back from Vietnam. His heroin, branded Blue Magic, hits the street twice as good and half as much as the competition. It is so pure that dead junkies turn up all over New York. The police are baffled, but look in all the wrong places. It never occurs to them that a black man is behind the scheme. Richie, whose whacked-out partner is one of Blue Magic's victims, is given his own task force. He finally targets Frank, but no one will believe him. Frank flies under the radar. He hires only relatives, a veritable army of brothers like Huey Lucas, Chiwetel Ejiofor, as well as cousins, whom he sets up with storefront businesses that function as drug distribution centers. He maintains a low profile and adheres to a rigid code of conduct. His major weekly outings are to church with his mother, the inestimable Ruby Dee, or to his nightclub with wife Eva, Limari Nadal, a former Miss Puerto Ricos in The Cotton Club, and Hoodlum. When Bumpy dies in his arms, Frank moves into the vacuum caused by his death with ruthless guile and a friendly personality. Richie's major opposition comes from within. New York's anti-drug task force, the Special Investigations Unit, is rife with corruption. As personified by Detective Trupo, a strutting Josh Brolin, the SIU takes its cut right off the top. In a story that ranges from the jungles of Harlem and Thailand to North Carolina backwoods, Scott is both hurried and leisurely. He covers a lot of territory, often in low light levels and with the Vietnam War playing on background TV sets, soaking up the sordid atmosphere, including naked, surgically masked women cutting the dope so no one will steal anything, and celebrities like Joe Louis cheerfully slumming with the gangsters. The scruffiness of Richie's world makes a brilliant contrast to Frank's penthouse, yet both worlds teem with moral ambiguity. If there are no false steps here, there are few highlights either. Such films as The Godfather and Serpico contain iconic scenes and sequences. American Gangster contributes little. It's workmanlike and engrossing, but what sticks in the mind are Frank and Richie, not what anybody does. The film concocts a final sequence in which the two finally meet and do a deal, the deal that apparently sprung Frank from prison to enjoy his old age. Frank rats out the SIU cops who shook him down, resulting in most of the unit going to prison. Richie ends up leaving the force to become a lawyer and eventually represents Frank. So American Gangster finally shows its true colors. It's really a buddy movie. Despite its grandiose title and being based on a true story, American Gangster is not the definitive American Gangster film. Only half the film concerns the gangster element, although it is the classic rise to power story through boldness, cunning, and strategic brutality. The other half of the film is the archetypal story of an increasingly shunned cop who overcomes the odds to dispense justice. This aspect of American Gangster, plus its 70s New York and New Jersey urban settings, make it evoke the French Connection and Serpico more than The Godfather or Goodfellas. Denzel Washington as drug baron Frank Lucas, and Russell Crowe as the incorruptible cop Richie Roberts, who brings Lucas down, both give fine yet safe performances. American Gangster may have been a better film if directed by Michael Mann, Heat, or David Fincher, Zodiac, but it is still a satisfying 2.5 hours of entertainment courtesy of director Ridley Scott, Gladiator, Black Hawk Down. Details concerning the institutionalized corruption in the New York police force and how the Vietnam War was used to smuggle heroin into the USA give it a little extra bite. American Gangster is a 2007 American biographical crime film directed and produced by Ridley Scott and written by Steven Zen. The film is loosely based on the criminal career of Frank Lucas, a gangster from LaRange, North Carolina, who smuggled heroin into the United States on American service planes returning from the Vietnam War. Before being detained by a task force led by New York detective Richie Roberts, the film stars Denzel Washington and Russell Crowe with co-stars Ted Levine, John Ortiz, Josh Brolin, Chiwetel, Ruby Dee, Lamari Nadal, and Cuba Gooding Jr. development for the film. And he began in 2000 when Universal Pictures and Imagine Entertainment purchased the rights to a New York Magazine story about the rise and fall of Lucas 2 years later. Screenwriter Steven Zen introduced a 170-page scriptment to Scott Original. Production plans were to commence in Toronto for budget purposes. However, production eventually relocated K-City because of the film's rising budget. Universal canceled production in 2004 after negotiations with Terry George. It was later revived with Scott at the helm in March 2005. Principal photography commenced over a period of 5 months from July to December 2006. Filming took place throughout New York City and concluded in Thailand. American Gangster premiered in New York on October 20th, 2007 and was released in the United States on November 2nd. The film was well received by critics and grossed over $266 million. Worldwide, many of the people portrayed, including Roberts and Lucas, have stated that the film took much creative license with the story, and 3 former D agents sued Universal, claiming the agency's portrayal was demoralizing. American Gangster was nominated for 21 awards, including 2 Oscar nominations for Best Art Direction and Best Supporting Actress for Ruby Dee, who also won a Screen Actors Guild Award for Outstanding Performance by a Female Actor in a supporting role movie plot. In 1968, Frank Lucas is the right-hand man of Harlem mob boss Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. When Johnson dies of a heart attack, Frank enters the heroin trade, buying directly from producers in Thailand and smuggling it into the U.S. through returning Vietnam War servicemen. Frank sells his heroin under the brand Blue Magic, whose affordability and purity make it incredibly popular, eliminating much of his competition. Newark detective and aspiring lawyer Richie Roberts is ostracized in his precinct after handing in almost $1 million that he found in a mobster's car. Captain Lou Tuek puts Roberts in charge of a special task force that targets major drug suppliers after Roberts' partner overdoses on Blue. Magic Roberts is also depicted having a bitter divorce battle with his ex-wife. Over his infidelity, Frank's heroin racket prospers. He eventually sells Blue Magic wholesale to many dealers in the New York tri-state area and expands his distribution through other criminal organizations. With this monopoly, Frank becomes Harlem's top crime lord, opening legitimate business fronts and maintaining a low profile while befriending politicians and famous celebrities such as Joe Louis. He buys a mansion for his mother and recruits his 5 brothers as his lieutenants. Frank eventually falls in love with and marries Eva, a Puerto Rican beauty queen. He attends the fight of the century with her, where Robert spots Frank, notices he has better seats than the Italian mobsters, and begins investigating him. Frank also comes to odds with competing local gangster Nicky Barnes, corrupt NYPD Detective Nick Trupo, who is among many people Frank is forced to bribe, and the Corsac Mafia, who unsuccessfully attempt to assassinate Frank and his wife for putting them out of business one night. Robert's detectives witness one of Frank's cousins, Jimmy Z, shoot his girlfriend. He becomes their informant in lieu of being convicted. They make Jimmy wear a wire through which they learn that Frank has negotiated one final shipment of heroin after the fall of Saigon. They identify and search one of the last planes carrying Lucas stock, discovering that it is being smuggled through the coffins of dead servicemen. They follow the drugs into Newark's projects and obtain a warrant to raid Frank's heroin processing facility, which results in the death of Frank's nephew, Stevie Lucas, and the arrest of Frank's brother Huey. They then arrest the other 4 brothers, and finally Frank himself. During a trial against Frank, Roberts offers him a chance at leniency if he will help him expose corrupt police officers, to which Frank agrees. Following Frank's cooperation, 3 of the New York EA and many NYPD officers are arrested and convicted, while Trupo becomes a defense attorney and has Frank as his first client. Frank is sentenced to 70 years in prison, of which he serves 15 years and is released in 1991. Denzel Washington as Frank Lucas. Russell Crowe as Richie Roberts, Ejiofor as Huey Lucas, Josh Brolin as Detective Trupo Lamari Nadal as Eva Ted Levine as Lou Tubique, Roger Guyver Smith as Nate John Hawks as Freddie Spearman, AR as Moses Jones, Yel Vasquez as Aloons Brusso, Malcolm Goodwin as Jimmy Z, UBED as Mahali Lucas, Frank's mother Ruben, Santiago Hudson as Doc, Carla Gino as Lori Roberts, John Ortiz as Javier J. Rivera, Cuba Gooding Jr. as Nicky Barnes, Armand Ante as Dominic Catano, Joe Morton as Charlie Williams, Richie Coster as Joey Sano, Idris Elba as Tango Common, as Turner Lucas, Tip Harris as Stevie Lucas, Kevin Corrigan as Camp Easy Robert, Ferraro as McCann, John Polito as Rossi, Katie Strickland as Richie's attorney, Norman Reus as detective, and more Roger Bart as us attorney Rick Young as Consa, Clarence Williams III as Bumpy Johnson, uncredited American Gangster movie. Review: apart from the detail that he was a heroin dealer, Frank Lucas' career would be an ideal case study for a business. School American Gangster tells his success story, inheriting a crime empire from his famous boss Bumpy Johnson. He cornered the New York drug trade with admirable capitalist strategies. He personally flew to Southeast Asia to buy his product directly from the suppliers, used in an ingenious importing scheme to get it into the United States, and sold it at higher purity and lower cost than anyone else was able to. At the end, he was worth more than $150 million and got a reduced sentence by cutting a deal to expose 3AR of the NYPD narcotics officers as corrupt. And he always took his mom to church on Sunday. Lucas is played by Denzel Washington in another one of those performances where he is affable and smooth on the outside, yet ruthless enough to set an enemy on fire. Here's a detail: as the man goes up in flames, Frank shoots him to put him out of his agony. Now that's merciful. His stubborn antagonist in the picture is a police detective named Richie Roberts, Russell Crowe, who gets a very bad reputation in the department. How does he do that? By finding $1 million in drug money and turning it in. What the hell kind of a thing is that to do when the usual practice would be to share it with the boys? There is something inside Roberts that will not bend, not even when his powerful colleague Josh Brolin threatens him. He vows to bring down Frank Lucas, and he does, although it isn't easy, and his most troubling opposition comes from within the police. Lucas, the student of the Lake Bumpy, has a simple credo: treat people, right? Keep a low profile. Adhere to sound business practices and hand out turkeys on Thanksgiving. He can trust the people who work for him because he pays them very well, and many of them are his relatives in the movie. At least Lucas is. Low-key and soft-spoken. No rings on his fingers, no gold around his neck, no spinners on his hubcaps. With a quiet marriage to a sweet wife and a Brooks Brothers image, it takes the authorities the long time to figure out who he is, because they can't believe an African American could hijack the Harlem drug trade from the mafia. The mafia can't believe it either, but Frank not only pulls it off, but is still alive at the end. When it was first announced, Ridley Scott's film was inevitably called The Black Godfather. Not really. For one thing, it tells two parallel stories, not one. And it really has to, because without Roberts, there would be no story to tell, and Lucas might still be in business. But that doesn't save us from a stock female character who is becoming increasingly tiresome in the movies. The wife, Carla Gino, who wants Roberts to choose between his job and his family. Their obligatory scenes together are recycled from a dozen or 100 other plots, and although we sympathize with her will they all be targeted for assassination, we grow restless during her complaints. Robert's domestic crisis is not what the movie is about. It's about an extraordinary entrepreneur whose story was told in a New York Magazine article by Mark Jacobson as adapted into a somewhat fictionalized screenplay by Steve Zinn. Schindler's List, Lucas is a loyal driver, bodyguard, and coat holder for Bumpy Johnson, who has inspired characters in 3 other movies, including The Cotton Club. He listens carefully to Johnson's advice, cradles him when he is dying, then takes over and realizes the fatal flaw in the Harlem drug business. The goods come in through the after having been stepped on all along the way. So he flies to Thailand, goes upriver for a tough face with the general in charge of drugs, and is rewarded for this seemingly foolhardy risk with an exclusive contract. The drugs will come to the United States inside the coffins of American casualties, which is apparently based on fact. It's all arranged by one of his relatives in terms of his visible lifestyle. The story of Frank Lucas might as well be the story of J.C. Penney, except that he hands out turkeys instead of pennies. Everyone in his distribution chain is reasonably happy because the product is high quality, the price is right, and there's money for everyone. Ironically, an epidemic of overdoses occurs when Lucas high-grade stuff is treated by junkies as if it's the usual weaker street strength. Then Lucas starts practicing what marketing experts call branding. It becomes known that his Blue Magic offers twice the potency at half the price, and other suppliers are forced off the streets by the rules of the marketplace, not turf wars. This is an engrossing story told smoothly and well, and Russell Crowe's contribution is enormous. It's not his fault. His wife complains looking like a careworn bulldog. His Richie Roberts studies for a law degree remains inviolate in his ethical standards and just keeps plugging away, building his case. The film ends not with its Scarface-style shootout, but with Frank and Richie sitting down for a long, intelligent conversation written by Zen to show 2 smart men who both know the score as I. Hinted above, less The Godfather than Wall Street. Although for that matter, a movie named American Gangster could have been made about Kenneth Lay. Here's a startlingly original true life story told in an oddly unoriginal way. And that attempt at instant classic status in the title doesn't quite convince. It's got no more dark grandeur than American Idol. The film is about the 1970s Harlem drug. Lord Frank Lucas and Richie Roberts, the straight arrow cop who took him down Lucas's career, is heavily pregnant with one irresistible metaphor. He claimed to have directly imported high-grade heroin into the United States from the Far East during the Vietnam War, hiding the drugs in the flag, back coffins of fallen American troops, containers that naturally no one dared touch. Criminals tend also to be liars, of course, and it is possible that this particular juicy detail may be exaggerated or just invented, but director Ridley Scott has taken the inner-city urban myth at face value in this muscular period drama, starring Denzel Washington as New York's Emperor of Smack and Russell Crowe as the rumpled officer coming after him. Other cut. Information about this film before getting into the details of what my thoughts on this film are. I would like to pass on a little technique I have for watching films with runtimes hovering around the 3-hour range before I start. I already plan on watching it in roughly 3 sessions to break it up. I have learned that this will eliminate the possibility of missing out on a great film due to thinking I do not have the time to see it with that in mind before going in. I hit the play button and told myself that if the storyline captured me, then how long I watched would depend on that. American Gangster turned out to be a compelling single-sitting watch as I took in the life of Frank Lucas through the cinematic eye of talented director Ridley Scott. Denzel Washington was excellent in the lead, and his delivery was prefect almost too much, as the film seemed to portray him as a good guy despite the horrible actions he was. Committing some of this could be accounted to Washington's unmistakable charm, and the rest of why his character was conveyed as a hero was because this was how his community viewed him. At least this is what I took from The View. The story took on the 3-hour length was excessive, but to the filmmaker's credit, other than some useless development of Russell Crowe's character, the bulk of the script was used to capture the life of Frank Lucas, from the rise of his empire to the inevitable crumbling of it with a detailed eye. The rest of the cast surrounding Washington was also top tier, which made for a collection of great side characters and strong performances all around. There was not much of this film that did not feel and look realistic to the true events and the era they happened in Crowe and Washington, although with little screen time together, do deliver some fun chemistry in their interactions. The business model of Lucas heading to Southeast Asia to get his supply to cut out the middleman was genius and something that could have only been accomplished during the time of the war. And as the film progressed, I was waiting for how the script would approach what Lucas would do once the soldiers were discharged and returned home to my enjoyment. The third act did a great job of closing out the several-year-long run Lucas had the both good and bad impact he had on people's lives, as well as his family surrounding him, and how easily one mistake could cause everything to fall apart. The strength in this film script was the captivating writing that was detailed enough to make you feel like you were truly getting to know who Lucas was. One of the faults of this film to me was that despite the great performance from Crowe, a lesser headlining star could have easily filled the role, which could have kept the theme from focusing off of main plot too. Explain Crowe is a big name, and with his presence in the movie, there comes a certain allotment of screen time he must get, most of which was spent over explaining the fact he was basically a bad father and a womanizer. This could have easily been conveyed in only a scene or two and through some dialogue, rather than too much time being spent on a useless subplot between he and his wife, played by Carla. Gino, their scenes were not bad, and both provided the film with strong performances, but in the end, their subplot was useless to the closing of the story and just sucked up. Time regardless, American Gangster is still a captivating tale of a clever man who was opportunistic and determined, something that was perfectly conveyed through Denzel Washington. The detail in the film was spot on, and the soundtrack was also a great addition to help capture the time period. American Gangster is one of the better crime sagas out there. The scope of the storyline is ambitious, but so was the character the film is based on, and the time spent watching this one will be long, but worth it to see the great performances of a very large cast of skilled actors and actresses that pull you into the era and the empire of Frank Lucas. I think it is a safe statement to say that most people like myself appreciate a movie that depicts a person or persons rising to the top of the food chain by perseverance, hard work, and some smarts, even if their profession is less than honorable. Ridley Scott, best known for Black Hawk Down and Gladiator, seems to agree with my assumption, because he's back behind the director's chair telling the real-life tale of a two-bit hustler turned drug kingpin, an American Gangster. The story is about the life of Frank Lucas, Denzel Washington, a street-savvy guy who rose to power in the heroin trade in New York City during the late 60s and early 70s, and Richie Roberts, Russell Crowe, an incorruptible police officer trying to stop him. Similar stories have been told before. Scarface and Serpico come to mind, but American Gangster takes a stab at combining both plots while delving deeper into the characters and the personal implications of their choices. To start, both characters sacrifice their families for personal gain. For Frank Lucas, his desire to live the life of a prominent white man, he's black, by the way, supersedes everything. Detains his honest, hardworking Southern family by recruiting them into his criminal to coordinate the shipment of pure heroin into the States, and his four brothers to become the key distributors. in the tri-state area for Richie Roberts. He's left his wife and son on the back burner while he feverishly tries to keep drugs off of the streets, root out corruption on the police force, and study for his bar exam. Both of them think they are acting for the greater good, even though they are destroying all that keeps them honest and grounded. And while American Gangster doesn't reinvent the genre, watching these two central figures try and stay afloat amongst all the Flatsome and Jets, some was worth the cost of admission. Denzel Washington, who is probably one of the best actors alive today, is exceptional as Frank Lucas. It was bewildering to watch him switch between brutal gangster and family man on a moment's notice. And it's all done with the same mannerisms you and I would have while talking to a friend on the phone about a trivial occurrence. Calm, collected, and cool for him. There is no difference between setting a man on fire and shooting him in cold blood or taking his mother to church every Sunday. Russell Crowe isn't a slouch by any means either. His depiction of a man caught between a rock and a hard place was equally effective. It's hard to fathom that 75% of the police force was corrupt in those days, and that being honest meant you're a target by your peers as well as the criminals. It was painful to watch him try to hold on to his friends and family, even though he knew in his heart he couldn't keep them. I should also mention that the set and art departments for this movie put on a great production. Capturing the look and feel of an early 1970s New York City can't be an easy task, but these guys and gals made it look very realistic. I especially like the little VW assigned to Crowe. There are some great supporting characters throughout too. Josh Brolin as the corrupt detective Trupo, Armand Asante as the unhappy mobster Dominic Catano, and Cuba Gooding Jr. as fellow street hustler Nicky Barnes all add some compelling moments to the mixture and should be applauded for their work, especially Cuba. Since he's done some horrible work recently, the lone drawback to American Gangster is it is damn near 3 hours long. As are most of Ridley's better movie, if it's the classic case of not knowing what was or wasn't needed to make the film work. The incident with Richie and his partner Javier John Ortiz didn't need so much airtime, neither did all the cardum drama or family dinners and parties. The scaling back or elimination of these scenes would have allowed for more emphasis on what I thought was a rather weak ending. I felt the finale was anticlimactic. It almost seemed like the writer Steven Zen suddenly realized he needed a way to end the film, so he just patched something on more details. If there's one thing I took away from Ridley Scott's American Gangster, it's this. It's really, really hard to make a fresh original mob movie. This isn't to suggest Scott's film is a bad one. On the contrary, the movie is exceptionally well made, with a sharp script, meticulous direction, and typically terrific performances from its leads. Denzel Washington and Russell Crowe. Had it been made 35 years ago, it would be a classic, but it wasn't made 35 years ago, and over the intervening decades, variations on its characters, themes, dialogue, and overall storyline have appeared on screen so often that for all its quality, American Gangster feels a little shop-worn rather than a classic. It feels like a recipe mixed from past classics and near classics, healthy portions of The Godfather and Goodfellas, dollops of Serpico and Prince of the City, occasional splashes of Scarface and The French Connection in New Jack City, and even Apocalypse Now American Gangster is based on the true story of Frank Lucas Washington, a late 1960s, early 1970s Harlem drug lord whom the film portrays as being above the mafia. He's actually their primary source for heroin, which really isn't the same thing, but close enough. It's a conceit, a black boss more powerful than the mob, that in theory offers a novel retelling of the gangster saga in practice, though. The familiar tropes are all still there. The smart, quiet young man who listens and learns as a mob underling who publicly takes down a local strongman to show his mettle, who acquires wealth, stature, and a sexy trophy wife, Lamari. Nadal, who is let down by the flash and incompetence of his associates, etc., etc. Same ironic montages combining the sacred and profane here. It's amazing grace play as Lucas's crew is rounded up and carted to jail. The movie's more novel innovation is to pair this genre formula with another. The police procedural detective, Richie Roberts Crowe, is a cop of frank Serpico-like incorruptibility, a trait that's made him deeply mistrusted within the department. When he refuses to dip into the bag full of cash he finds in a drug dealer's car, he's seen as not merely crazy, but dangerous given drug lord's tendency to buy off the police. However, his chief Ted Levine decides Roberts is the perfect man to put in charge of an anti-drug task force. Soon he's got his nose to the pavement trying to figure out just where Blue Magic, a powerful new street brand of heroin, comes from. The answer is Indochina. In an effort to cut out the middleman drug boss, Lucas has made a personal pilgrimage to Vietnam and rafted a priver seeking not a heart of darkness, but a reliable supplier. He finds one in a Court Quang General Rick Young, who is happy to sell wholesale. In a gruesome twist, Lucas, with the help of a cousin by marriage in the Army, smuggles his product back to the States in the caskets of fallen servicemen by controlling the entire process from production to street sale. Lucas is able to keep prices low and quality high, driving competitors out of business and establishing himself as the go-demand for quality junk in New York. It's only a matter of time, of course, before D-Tech Roberts is onto him. The two gifted leads cat and mouse their way along from there, though. In a pleasant break from silly cinematic tradition, they never meet face to face until the final bust that brings Lucas down. Washington puts his sleek charisma to good use as the fastidious Lucas, a man who can shoot someone in the head without batting an eye, but is thrown into turmoil by a splash of blood on his rug. That's a $25,000 alpaca he hollers at a flunky trying desperately to mop it up. You blot that you don't rub it. The one time Washington overplays his hand is in a scene after an attempted hit, channeling Pacino at his most overheated. He pounds his chest with both fists. While frothing, "They tried to kill my wife." The line is, of course, featured in the trailer and will doubtless be trotted out come Oscar time in the likely event Washington gains an acting nod. It's not a particularly deep or probing performance, but it's a compelling one. Nonetheless, Crowe is comparably strong as the rumpled Roberts. And while the role is a less iconic one, it also allows for greater subtlety. His backstory, a child custody fight with his ex-wife, etc., meanders a bit, but Crowe manages to keep it clear of melodrama and even uncovers an insight or two. Roberts is, as his ex-wife, charges a man who uses his squeaky clean professional reputation as license to be an utter jackass in his personal life, a mirror image of Lucas, the murderous family. The supporting cast, meanwhile, is one of the deepest and richest in recent memory, featuring among many others Ejiofor, Josh Brolin, Cuba Gooding Jr., John Hawkes, Carla Gugino, Ruby D. Armandasanti, and Joe. Morton Scott's direction is confident, precise, and straightforward. He cuts carefully back and forth between Lucas's story and Roberts's, but generally Izu's goadier affects his one peculiar decision is to relegate the post-bus relationship between Lucas and Roberts in many ways. The most odd and fascinating turn the film takes to a relatively brief postscript in his Torch, 37-minute epic. But then, perhaps that's the point. Scott clearly knows his film rolls along in well-worn tracks. His title, after all, could double as the name of the genre he's working in. American Gangster isn't daring or revelatory and doesn't have much to say about crime or society or human nature that hasn't been said before, but it demonstrates how, in the proper hands, everything old can be new. Again, from shady cops to ruthless hoodlums, Ridley Scott's American Gangster thrills with the grandiose bravado only a master filmmaker can accomplish. Suspenseful and engrossing Denzel Washington and Russell Crowe deliver unbeatable performances, with keen character development and a detailed screenplay without over-glorifying crime, and even with the typical true story. Source material: American Gangster is one of the most entertaining films 2007 has to offer. It is 1968, and the former Harlem Kingpin has passed away, giving rise to several competing factions of criminals who fight for control of the local drug industry. Frank Lucas, Denzel Washington, quickly rises to the top with his goldmine idea of buying heroin from a pure source in East Asia, where crooked U.S. military personnel are able to smuggle it into the United States. But close on his heels is Detective Ritchie, Robert's Russell Crowe, a seemingly honest cop who forms a special investigation unit to track down the ruthless mobster. Opening with a brilliantly violent scene of Frank executing a nameless offender through the use of fire and bullets. Audiences are immediately witness to the strikingly blank-faced cruelty of a villain not even remotely portrayed in the trailer. Rather, he's painted in more flattering layers of charisma. It is a preface for the ruthless nature of the criminal who becomes an unequaled success among the drug dealers and crooked police officials that pepper the streets of this Scorsese-esque gritty crime drama. Later, it comes as no shock when Lucas burns an expensive alpaca coat given to him by his wife with Naria Blink and is soon unable to keep his family from harm. In fact, he has no qualms about involving them in the business. Sympathy for Frank is derived only because of his austere determination and arresting personality, a valuable commodity in anti-heroes not. For the suffering of his mother or wife, for which he appears unable to show real emotions. Russell Crowe's Ritchie is equally atypical, especially for a leading protagonist. He is unable to control his personal life, fighting in court over the custody of his son, all the while cheating on his wife with numerous other women. And yet, his professional life is an contrast as he diligently works to catch not only the bad guys, but also the treacherous insiders notorious for turning in $1 million in unmarked cash. He struggles against the dishonest nature of his co-workers to disquietingly uphold the law. He is, in his own way, as much of a vigilante, or working by his own personal code of right and wrong, as his colleagues are corrupt, and yet, unexpectedly during court, he realizes the hypocritical manner of his personal shortcomings versus his professional mindset, to the point that he eventually gives up his son. Lawlessness and organized crime exist because of the mutual benefits that the gangsters have with the law. Frank states this consummately near the end, reasoning that there are simply too many employees of the drug business. No one, including the law, wants it to stop on top of the inning. Amount of cops on the take as stressed by the end credits, claiming that 3R of the entire drug enforcement division was dishonest. Ritchie must deal with jurisdiction regulations that hinder his progress, and the crafty Frank utilizes to mask any involvement with blue magic, the brand name he uses on his heroin. American Gangster draws many parallels to the themes and designs of other archetypal gangster flicks, including The Godfather and Scarface. Great pictures to borrow from, if done carefully and respectfully. Frank is completely independent and unflinchingly brutal. Like Al Pacino, Tony Montana, while his criminal organization is structured similarly to the Italian gangsters of the Corleone family, the most prominent difference in their behavior is the lack of familial importance, which is most heavily stressed in The Godfather. Frank goes through the motions, but is distant from that association, opting instead to preserve his business even when it means meting out criminal justice to his own family members. Though this specific action is in fact relevant to the previous comparison. His intelligence and influential presence are only matched by Ritchie, who never even comes in contact with him until the exhilarating conclusion. The other standout actor worth mentioning is Josh Brolin, who turns in a memorable performance as True, a sinister cop who signifies his wickedness with the simple slow-motion flicker of his sleek black leather trench coat. The ensemble of other notable players include Chiwetel Ejiofor, John Hawkes, Carla Gino, Cuba Gooding Jr., and Idris Elba. The likes of American Gangster have been seen before. Its motifs and storytelling are not one of a kind, but director Ridley Scott makes no errors in the production process, crafting an epic feel with all of the resources available to him exceptional. Acting a perfectly suspenseful finale, attention to details and costuming and styling faithful to the time period, sharp scripting, and a sensational score by Mark Streitenfeld. It's a film of such power and resonance that it can't be easily forgotten. Extra information: there are too many movies being filmed in New York. Every single movie seems like it's a postcard to go to NYC. Don't get me wrong. New York is a beautiful place that looks like the movie Blade Runner, but what happened to the old New York? The real New York, filled with all of the filth that made the city dangerous. The ugly, decrepit, not safe to walk around. Past dusk. New York, when I'm talking about American Gangster, I'm talking about the newest movie with Denzel, Washington, and Russell Crowe, not the new music album by Jay-Z, whereas there have been too many to count. Movies about the Italian and Russian mob. There have been hardly any movies about the African-American mob. Denzel takes us through the life of the notorious living legend Frank Lucas, the New York drug lord. He shows us how he bribed the U.S. Army during the Vietnam War to smuggle heroin in all of the deceased soldiers' coffins. He lets us see how he made a lucrative business while turning Harlem in the 1970s into a hellhole filled with overdosed moms and their crying children in every high-rise project. He shows us how Lucas wanted his entire life to look like it was scripted. He maintains a perfect facade as living the Black Norman Rockwell dream, wearing the best clothes, flashing the perfect smile, eating at the good old corner diner, marrying the trophy wife, and always having the photogenic Thanksgiving dinner. Denzel is not the villain he played in Training Day. He was the devil in Training Day, corrupting an innocent soul to do his bidding, an American gangster. Even though he plays the villain, he acts like Black Jesus in a bespoke suit at times throughout the movie. You're not even rooting for the protagonist. The good guy in Gangster is a womanizer. He's too honest for his own good. He's a workaholic and doesn't care about his wife, his child, or preserving his friendships and family. He's not rich and nobody knows who he is. He's from Jersey. Every cop in New York looks down on a cop from Jersey. Usually the good guys in movies are the most boring character in the film. But Russell Crowe, who plays the detective Richie Roberts, who brings Frank Lucas to justice, is one of the most layered, conflicted, and complicated movie heroes to date. All he wants to do is find and capture Frank Lucas, even if it means being hated by his own police department, his own partner, the police in New York, and his entire circle of trust. Crowe ranks, right, up there with Eastwood, Pacino, Dyro, and Tommy Lee Jones. It's hard to choose who to root for, or who does the better acting job. Russell Crowe shined in the dud Virtuosity, the last movie he co-starred in with Washington, and he shines in Gangster 2, Ridley Scott films. This New York movie with as much tender love and care as would Spike Lee or Martin Scorsese. He trusts his starring alpha males and his hip-hop ensemble, cast to bring the rise and fall of Frank Lucas to life. American Gangster brings back the rock hop and mob period piece thrill ride. My parents had the opportunity to see movies like The French Connection, Serpico, and The Godfather in theaters. I'm very proud to say that I've had the chance to see American Gangster on the silver screen. It seems that the history of American organized crime in the 20th century still hasn't been completely mapped by the movies, and this is slightly too concerned with playing as a sequel SL alternative to a whole raft of movies. Rise and Fall Drugs Racket evokes not only Goodfellas, Scarface, and The King of New York, but any number of street-level quickies from New Jack City through Black Caesar to Blow, plus director Ridley Scott and writer Stephen Allen have been watching The Wire and draw a few faces from the cast, along with some structural licks and montages that make dullish cop work exciting and suspenseful, given that Scott is never the subtlest of directors. A montage of Frank living luxuriously and having a good time segues into shots of dead junkies to remind us where his cash comes from. There's a risk that the film will congeal into formula. That this isn't the case is down to the inherent fascination of the material, a strong cast who flesh out sometimes vestigial characters. Third build Cuba Gooding Jr. has almost nothing to do, suggesting there's another longer cut out there, and Scott's genuine knack for making cliches exciting all over again, which only deserts him in regulation scenes in which cop and crook have marriage. Troubles from one point of view, this could have been called American Success Story, since it's almost the heroic tale of the way Frank sees a market junkies exploited poorly by lazy, privileged, white C-books. Armand Asante is the AIT mafia boss and comes up with daring, inventive solutions, making a connection in Vietnam and using dead soldiers' coffins to smuggle the horse into the States, which mean he can put a superior product onto the market at a lower price and build his own black-owned crime. Empire. He even gets away with it for so long because white idiots in law enforcement can't believe he's his own. Boss in Washington, who's slightly overdue the innate dignity bit here as a character who's not only a murdering bastard, but in the end a Stoll is given a redemption as he gets out of a long sentence by giving evidence which enables Richie, who goes from cop to lawyer, to prosecute all the crooked. Police in the city. Frank criticizes his relations and lieutenants if they dress like blaxploitation pimps, learning early that showing up for ringside seats at an Oi fight wearing a $50,000 chinchilla just attracts the wrong kind of attention. But he also goes the usual route of putting his little old Mama Ruby D inevitably in a mansion. She's not as saintly as most screen gangster mamas, and gaining a trophy wife Lamari Nadal. As Miss Puerto Rico, Scott pillages the Martin Scorsese and Sidney Lumet playbooks, throughout mixing social history with ultraviolence and excessive consumerism at every level, and the expected greatest hit soundtrack package. In a way, it's a disappointment that after reinvigorating film forms from science fiction through historical epic to road movie with his own style, Scott should rely so heavily on other directors. Visions here. This film directed by Ridley Scott, screenplay by Steven Zen, produced by Ridley Scott. Brian Grazer starring Russell Crowe, Denzel Washington, Chiwetel Ejiofor, Cuba, Gooding Jr., Josh Brolin, T. Armani, John cinematography, Harris Savides, edited by Petro Scalia, music by Mark Streitenfeld Production Companies, Imagine Entertainment, Scott F. Free. Productions, Relativity Media, distributed by Universal Pictures. Release dates: October 19, 2007 in Apollo Theater, November 2nd, 2007 in United States. Running time 157 minutes. Country United States. Language English. Budget $100. Million box office $269 million. So guys, this is the review of American Gangster movie and some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting. And if you like this video, please like it, share it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. And thanks for watching.